Hollywood didn't always play it safe. In the early 1932, before strict rules came down, movies were wilder, sharper, and bolder than you'd expect. These films showed ambition, desire, corruption, and power in ways that shocked audiences. Then 1934 hit, and the rulebook slammed shut, forcing studios to chop, re-edit, or even bury their own work. But what exactly made these films so untouchable? Let's uncover 15 stories that pushed Hollywood so far. The scissors had to come out. Babyface, 1933. Barbara Stanwyck didn't just star in Babyface, she detonated it. Playing Lily Powers, she's a woman exhausted from scraping by in her father's dingy Steeltown saloon. After a mentor bluntly advises her to use men to get ahead, she does exactly that, relentlessly. Scene by scene, Lily rises through the ranks of a New York bank, each promotion tied to another man who falls into her orbit. It was blunt, raw, and to audiences in 1933, almost unbelievable. The real shock wasn't Lily's hunger for success, it was how openly she pursued it. Unlike later films where bold women had to be punished for ambition, Lily never apologized, never looked back, and refused to falter. That terrified the gatekeepers. The censors swooped in, cutting dialogue, softening her behavior, and even tacking on a moralistic ending that forced Lily into a more respectable resolution. For decades, only this watered-down version circulated, leaving viewers with a diluted shadow of its original bite. Then, in 2004, the Library of Congress uncovered the uncut negative. The difference was staggering. Watching the restored film feels like a time bomb finally going off. Stanwyck's performance brims with electric defiance, her ambition sharp enough to slice through the screen. The original version makes it clear why Babyface is considered one of the most daring pre-code dramas ever made. Far from being a relic, it feels startlingly modern. Its commentary on power, gender, and survival still resonates. Babyface wasn't censored because it was weak. It was censored because it was too strong, too honest, and too bold for its time, and it scared Hollywood enough to rewrite the rules. Possessed 1931. Joan Crawford was no stranger to playing ambitious women, but Possessed took that image and made it dangerous. She stars as Marion Martin, a factory worker stuck in a small industrial town with little hope of escape. One chance encounter with a wealthy attorney, played by Clark Gable, changes everything. Marion seizes the opportunity, leaving behind her old life and stepping into a world of glittering privilege. For 1931, this wasn't just a drama, it was a warning shot. What made Possessed so bold wasn't simply Marion's ambition, but the way the film refused to shame her for it. She pursued wealth, romance, and power unapologetically, and Crawford delivered every line with an intensity that demanded respect. Audiences weren't used to seeing working-class women presented this way. Normally, Hollywood punished women who stepped outside their place. Here, Marion wasn't a caricature or a cautionary tale. She was flesh and blood, flawed but magnetic. Censors hated it. They feared it encouraged women to believe they could cross class lines and reshape their lives through determination and charm. After 1934, the film was trimmed and softened, with dialogue rewritten to lean on morality and downplay Marion's choices. For decades, viewers only saw the diluted version, stripped of its sharpest edge. Rediscovered later, Possessed emerged as one of Crawford's defining early performances. She gives Marion grit, vulnerability, and hunger, while Gable's role adds complexity rather than easy answers. Together, they created a film that rattled censors and thrilled audiences. Possessed wasn't buried because it was weak. It was reshaped because it said something too daring for its time, that women from ordinary beginnings could seize control of their destiny. And that idea alone was enough to terrify Hollywood's moral guardians. The story of Temple Drake, 1933. If one movie pushed Hollywood closer to enforcing the code, it was The Story of Temple Drake. Based on William Faulkner's controversial novel Sanctuary, the film follows Temple, a young woman from a prominent family who spirals after falling into the company of criminals. Miriam Hopkins played the role with haunting realism, but what rattled people was the story's grit. The imagery was stark, the tone bleak, and the moral lines were blurred beyond recognition. Critics claimed it was unfit for public viewing. Politicians and civic leaders joined the chorus, arguing that films like this would corrupt audiences. Paramount quickly realized they had a problem. Instead of fading into theaters quietly, Temple Drake became a lightning rod, proof for censors that Hollywood couldn't be trusted to police itself. When the production code was fully enforced in 1934, this film was cited as Exhibit A. It vanished from circulation for decades, hidden in vaults, and whispered about among film buffs. Rediscovered later, it shocked modern viewers, expecting something tame. Instead, they found a film that looked and felt like early film noir, complete with heavy shadows and moral dread. Temple Drake's disappearance wasn't about poor quality. It was about the mirror it held up. Hollywood couldn't stand its reflection, so it buried the film. Seeing it today, the boldness still cuts deep. The Sin of Nora Moran, 1933. At first glance, The Sin of Nora Moran looked like another courtroom melodrama, but director Phil Goldstone had something stranger in mind. The film told the story of a young woman facing execution for a crime she may not have committed. Sounds straightforward until you see how it's presented. Flashbacks, inside flashbacks, surreal dream sequences, overlapping images, and a narrative that felt like it was collapsing in on itself. Audiences in 1933 didn't know what to make of it. Critics dismissed it as confusing, even lurid, while censors worried about the moral ambiguity. Was Nora guilty? Was she a victim? The movie never offered clean answers, and that unsettled everyone who saw it. Instead of neat resolutions, viewers were left with a character whose choices defied Hollywood's moral template. For decades, the movie disappeared from circulation, but in hindsight, The Sin of Nora Moran feels revolutionary. Its style foreshadows noir, surrealism, and even later European art cinema. The visuals are dizzying, the tone feverish, and Zita Johan's performance is haunting. She shifts between despair, defiance, and quiet resignation, with a force that lingers long after the credits. Censors didn't just dislike Nora Moran, they feared it. Stories without clear lessons or tidy endings weren't safe for audiences in the eyes of the code. Rediscovered later, the film earned new respect. What was once too messy now looks like a daring step into cinematic experimentation. Safe in Hell, 1931. Dorothy Mackle's Safe in Hell wasn't just a drama, it was a pressure cooker. She plays Gilda, a woman on the run after a deadly confrontation in New Orleans. She flees to a Caribbean island, only to find herself trapped in a hotel filled with shady men, each one circling her like a predator. The walls practically sweat, menace, and the atmosphere grows suffocating by the minute. What made the film so controversial wasn't just the danger, it was Gilda herself. She wasn't the sweet, flawless heroine audiences were used to. She was flawed, defiant, desperate, and fighting to survive in a world stacked against her. That alone made her story dangerous for Hollywood's image at the time. Censors recoiled. Some states banned the film outright, while others demanded heavy edits. For decades, Safe in Hell lived more as legend than reality, a title whispered among collectors and rarely seen in public screenings. When it resurfaced, film lovers realized it was more than pulp shock. It was one of Warner Brothers' sharpest, grittiest dramas of the era. McHale's performance simmers with resilience, anchoring a film that feels almost like proto-noir. The code enforcers couldn't handle a woman who owned her story, even in desperation. Safe in Hell vanished because it was too raw, too real, and too unwilling to play nice. Night Nurse 1931. Barbara Stanwyck was no stranger to pushing boundaries, but Night Nurse cemented her as a pre-code legend. She plays Laura, a trainee nurse who gets more than she bargained for when she discovers two little girls deliberately being starved in a wealthy household. That alone was shocking material for 1931, but the film didn't stop there. It blended crime, corruption, and personal risk into a story that felt far more real than audiences were used to. And then there was Clark Gable, yes, the future king of Hollywood, playing a chauffeur with a streak of menace. His presence added layers of tension that audiences weren't ready for. The drama escalates quickly, pulling Laura into a dangerous battle to save the children. Censors were horrified. A film showing child neglect and a villainous Gable? That wasn't the image they wanted on screen. Some states banned the movie outright, while others hacked out key moments. By the time the production code took hold, Night Nurse was trimmed into something almost unrecognizable. Rediscovered years later, it struck critics as surprisingly modern. Themes of corruption, hiding behind wealth, the powerful preying on the powerless, and a woman refusing to look away. It all feels timeless. Stanwyck anchors the film with grit, determination, and flashes of humor. Night Nurse proved that the pre-code era wasn't just reckless, it was brave enough to show ugly truths that society preferred to ignore. 3 on a Match 1932. Few films from the Depression era captured its restless energy like 3 on a Match. The movie follows 3 childhood friends, played by Joan Blondell, Anne Dvorak, and a young Bette Davis, whose adult lives spin in wildly different directions. Davis plays the responsible one, Blondell the carefree one, but it's Dvorak's downward spiral that turned heads and stomachs. Her character abandons her family, plunges into reckless living, and winds up entangled with gangsters. For 1932, this was incendiary. The film didn't flinch from harsh realities, neglect, crime, addiction, and a finale so tense it left audiences reeling. All of this unfolds in less than 70 minutes, making it one of the fastest, most explosive dramas Warner Brothers ever released. Censors wasted no time. They claimed the movie glorified reckless behavior and spotlighted choices unfit for public viewing. Entire sequences were trimmed, and for decades, 3 on a Match existed more as a whispered legend than a widely available film. When rediscovered, audiences finally saw what had been hidden: a taut, urgent story powered by Warner Brothers. Trademark grit. The pacing is relentless, the dialogue sharp, and the atmosphere thick with Depression-era realism. Most striking of all is Anne Dvorak's performance, which feels startlingly modern, raw, vulnerable, and uncomfortably real. Critics today point to it as one of the finest portrayals of a character in freefall from the early sound era. 3 on a Match wasn't just daring, it was unforgettable, and it terrified censors because it didn't preach or punish. It simply showed a world spinning out of control and left audiences to deal with the truth. Call Her Savage 1932. Clara Bow was already famous as the it girl of the 1920 seconds, but Call Her Savage proved she still had fire to burn. Playing Nasa Springer, Bow delivered a performance filled with chaos, passion, and defiance. From reckless romances to explosive family revelations, the film barreled forward at breakneck speed, shocking audiences at nearly every turn. What set it apart wasn't just the outrageous plot twists, it was Bow herself. After years of relentless tabloid pressure and studio battles, she threw herself into the role with raw energy, almost as if she had nothing left to lose. The result was messy, fiery, and unforgettable. Critics gasped, audiences couldn't look away, and censors were practically waiting with scissors in hand. Entire states refused to screen it. Others chopped it into fragments that dulled its edge, reducing Bow's unrestrained performance to a shadow of itself. The controversy quickly overshadowed the film itself, and for decades, Call Her Savage lived more as rumor than reality, remembered as Clara Bow's swan song rather than a movie audiences could actually see. When rediscovered prints resurfaced, the truth came roaring back. What had been dismissed as reckless melodrama revealed itself as a wild, daring character study anchored by a star who refused to play it safe. Nasa Springer blazed with intensity, a woman unafraid to fight, fall, and rise again, and Bow matched her step for step. Call Her Savage wasn't just another scandalous pre-code film, it was Bow's final statement to Hollywood. She didn't exit quietly or politely. She went out exactly as she lived on screen, bold, untamed, and unforgettable. Scarface 1932. Howard Hawks didn't just make a gangster movie with Scarface. He made the gangster movie. Paul Muni stars as Tony Camonte, a ruthless crime boss whose rise and fall unfolds with machine gun speed and unstoppable ambition. At a time when audiences were used to gangsters getting quick punishment, Scarface threw caution aside. It showed the thrill of power, the chaos of ambition, and the terrifying grip of crime in a way no one had ever dared. Censors went into full panic mode. They demanded multiple alternate endings, including one where Tony pays the ultimate price in a more moral fashion. They pushed for dialogue changes, softer scenes, and even tried to block the release entirely. The version most people saw for decades was a watered-down cut, stripped of its sharpest edges, while Hawks's original vision was locked away in vaults. Even trimmed, Scarface was explosive. Its pacing was relentless, its tone razor-sharp, and its impact immediate. Critics railed against it, calling it indecent, yet audiences poured into theaters. It was too bold to be ignored. Hawks' staging of shootouts, especially with the iconic X motif marking death, was unlike anything moviegoers had experienced. When the uncut version resurfaced decades later, the difference was staggering. Hawks's original was rawer, faster, and far more daring, proving how much censors had tried to blunt its bite. The movie went on to inspire generations, including Brian De Palma's 1983 reimagining. And just like the original, that one faced battles with censorship too. The legacy of Scarface is simple. You can bury a film, slice it into pieces, or try to rewrite its ending. But if a story is powerful enough, it will always claw its way back into the spotlight. Red-Headed Woman, 1932. Jean Harlow didn't just star in Red-Headed Woman. She practically lit the screen on fire. Playing Lil Andrews, a secretary with her sights set on her married boss, Harlow shattered the sweet, wholesome image Hollywood usually assigned to women. Lil wasn't modest, she wasn't apologetic, and she certainly wasn't waiting for permission. She was bold, calculating, and willing to break every social rule to climb her way into high society. For audiences in 1932, this was shocking. A lead female character who schemed her way forward, laughed while doing it, and didn't crumble in regret? That was unheard of. Most films of the era demanded punishment for women who stepped outside convention, but Red-Headed Woman let Harlow shine in a role that was funny, sly, and completely magnetic. Censors weren't amused. Entire states banned the movie, outright, claiming it glamorized dishonorable behavior. In places where it wasn't banned, it was sliced to pieces, with scenes softened or removed entirely. Ironically, the restrictions only gave the movie a bigger reputation. Bootleg copies circulated, and whispered screenings kept its legend alive even as the official prints were censored. When the film resurfaced in restored form years later, critics finally saw it for what it was, not just a scandal piece, but a satire. Harlow's sharp timing and mischievous smirk mocked the very hypocrisies polite society wanted to hide. Instead of being a villain, she became an anti-hero audiences couldn't resist. Red-Headed Woman wasn't trimmed because it was weak. It was cut because it dared to show a woman who lived by her own rules and never looked back. That was too much for 1932 censors, but it's exactly what makes it timeless today. Blonde Venus 1932. Marlene Dietrich had already built a reputation for mystery and allure, but Blonde Venus sent it soaring, and not without trouble. She plays Helen Faraday, a devoted wife who returns to the nightclub stage when her husband falls ill. What begins as a desperate sacrifice for her family soon spirals into a storm of glamour, temptation, and blurred loyalties. The real shock came from how the film mixed domestic melodrama with smoky cabaret spectacle. One moment Dietrich is caring for her child, the next she's dazzling audiences in glittering costumes. And then there's the unforgettable gorilla suit number, where she sheds fur to reveal sequins and feathers, a sequence that burned itself into film history. For 1932, this was dynamite. Critics at the time were divided. Some praised Dietrich's hypnotic screen presence, while others dismissed the film as too suggestive and too European in its tone. Censors had no doubt. It was too much. Scenes were trimmed or softened for reissues. And the movie's reputation became tied more to controversy than to artistry. When revisited decades later, though, Blonde Venus revealed itself as something far richer, a lush, atmospheric story with one of Dietrich's most haunting performances. She dominates every frame, gliding effortlessly from tenderness to icy command. The film dares to show that choices in life are rarely neat or simple, and that was exactly what rattled the code enforcers. Blonde Venus wasn't censored because it was shallow. It was censored because it was too real about the complexity of love, duty, and reinvention. And in true Dietrich fashion, it proved that glamour could also be a weapon of storytelling power. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Even now, Island of Lost Souls feels unsettling. Adapted from H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau, the film stars Charles Laughton as the unnervingly calm scientist performing grotesque experiments in a remote jungle laboratory. His goal? To turn animals into human-like hybrids. The result is a nightmarish menagerie of half-human creatures, their voices echoing with anguish and their eyes pleading for release. The atmosphere is suffocating, the imagery grotesque, and the effect unforgettable. Audiences in 1932 weren't ready. British censors banned the movie outright, calling it repulsive and indecent. In the US, the scissors came out too, trimming scenes to soften its most shocking ideas. But even cut down, the movie rattled viewers. Instead of glossy escapism, they were confronted with visions of twisted science, primal screams, and a story that questioned what it really meant to be human. For decades, Island of Lost Souls was nearly impossible to see outside rare screenings. Its reputation grew in whispers, passed among horror fans, who swore it was one of the most disturbing films of its era. When it was finally restored and released more widely, modern audiences discovered a film not only terrifying but astonishingly ahead of its time. Themes of scientific hubris, cruelty disguised as progress, and the fragility of humanity still resonate nearly a century later. Island of Lost Souls wasn't just early horror, it was one of the boldest films of the decade, pushing boundaries far past what the production code could tolerate. Its legacy proves a chilling truth. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster on screen. It's the people who tried to keep you from seeing it. Murders in the Zoo, 1933. How far could a 1,933 movie really go? Murders in the Zoo answered that question with one of the most shocking opening sequences of the entire pre-code era. A jealous husband punishes his wife's admirer by sewing the man's lips shut. Yes, shown right there on screen. Audiences gasped, critics recoiled, and censors finally had proof that Hollywood had crossed a line they could no longer ignore. The rest of the film didn't hold back either. Lionel Atwill, already building a reputation as one of cinema's great villains, stars as the wealthy husband whose jealousy curdles into obsession. His cruelty escalates into carefully staged accidents, using exotic animals as his instruments of terror. Lions, snakes, alligators, and cages aren't just set dressing, they're weapons of control, turning the zoo into a nightmare arena. For moviegoers expecting light comedies or polished melodramas, this was a brutal jolt. Censorship boards reacted quickly. The film was banned outright in several states, and once the code took full effect, it was hacked into a shadow of its original form. For decades, Murders in the Zoo was more rumor than reality, whispered about by fans who claimed they had seen the full version but with little proof to back it up. When restored versions finally reappeared, modern audiences discovered a pulp thriller so brazen it still feels startling today. The mix of animal terror, human cruelty, and Atwill's unblinking performance made it one of the most daring experiments in early horror. Murders in the Zoo proved that pre-code Hollywood was willing to gamble big on shock value. And though it was buried for years, its rediscovery shows just how far the era was willing to push before the scissors came down. Employees Entrance 1933. Warren William, often called the pre-code king, reached his peak of icy brilliance in Employees Entrance. He plays Kurt Anderson, a ruthless department store manager who treats his business like a battlefield. Employees aren't people to him, they're pawns, to be moved, exploited, and discarded. Loyalty means nothing. Kindness is weakness, and profit is the only rule that matters. Audiences in 1933 had seen their share of villainous bosses, but never one this frighteningly believable. Anderson isn't a cartoon tyrant. He's cold, calculating, and terrifying precisely because he feels so real. His manipulations extend beyond the boardroom, pulling employees into personal and professional compromises that expose just how fragile their security really island. In the middle of the Great Depression, when millions were already living under the thumb of employers, this story hit dangerously close to home. Censors noticed. They cut scenes, trimmed dialogue, and muted the sharpest critiques. And when the production code came into full force in 1934, Employees Entrance was quietly shelved. For decades, it lived mostly as a reputation, whispered about as one of the darkest, boldest portraits of business life ever made. When the film finally resurfaced, its bite hadn't dulled one bit. In fact, its relevance had only sharpened. Watching it today, the menace doesn't come from gangsters or shadows. It comes from a boss with absolute control. Warren William delivers the role with such polished charm that the cruelty lands even harder. Employees Entrance wasn't erased because it was weak. It was hidden because it exposed an ugly truth. Sometimes the scariest villain doesn't carry a weapon. Sometimes he just wears a suit, sits behind a desk, and holds your paycheck in his hands. Red Dust, 1932. Jean Harlow and Clark Gable lit up the screen in Red Dust. But it wasn't the romance that shocked audiences. It was the frankness. Set on a rubber plantation in Indochina, the story blended tropical heat, quick wit, and raw tension. But the true lightning bolt was Harlow's performance. She lounged in bathtubs filled with suds, traded barbs with Gable, and carried herself with a carefree confidence that was almost too much for 1,932 audiences to handle. The chemistry between Harlow and Gable was undeniable. Their banter sizzled, their clashes sparked, and their attraction played out with a natural ease Hollywood rarely allowed at the time. The dialogue was sharp, the situations bold, and the film's tropical setting only added to its heady atmosphere. For MGM, Red Dust was a commercial triumph, quickly becoming one of the studio's biggest hits of the early 30 seconds. But for the censors, it was a different story. They weren't laughing at Harlow's quick quips or playful bathtub scenes. Instead, they branded the film indecent, and later, reissues were trimmed to dull the sharper edges. By the time the production code locked down Hollywood, Red Dust had been reshaped into something safer, but also less alive. Looking back now, it's easy to see why the film caused such panic. Harlow's character wasn't shy, quiet, or restrained. She was brash, witty, and unapologetically free. In an era that preferred women to be demure and submissive, she was everything but. Red Dust wasn't censored because it was weak. It was censored because it radiated too much vitality. Watching it today feels like a snapshot of a Hollywood that dared to play without rules, if only for a brief, brilliant window of time. So there you have it, 15 pre-code films that rattled Hollywood so badly they were cut, trimmed, or shoved into vaults after 1934. But history has a funny way of winning. Decades later, many of these movies were rediscovered, restored, and celebrated for the very things that once got them banned. Which of these daring classics would you want to see uncut? Drop your pick in the comments, subscribe for more hidden Hollywood stories, and let's keep uncovering the reels they tried to hide.